Good evening. We have double speakers tonight, so that's a double treat for us. Dr. Angie Maxwell is the director of the Blair Center of Southern Politics and Society, and an associate professor and holder of the Divers Blair Endowed Professorship in the Political Science Department in the J. William Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Maxwell graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Arkansas. She was also a Truman Scholar, and she went on to receive her Ph.D. in American Studies from the University of Texas in Austin. Her research and commentary have been featured on MSNBC's The Reid Report and The Cycle, and on NBC Nightly News. Her articles have appeared in Southern Cultures, Presidential Studies Quarterly, the Journal of Black Studies, American Behavioral Scientist, Race and Social Problems, Politics, Groups, and Identities, Social Science Quarterly, Virginia Quarterly Review, and the Southern Quarterly. Dr. Todd Shields is the Dean of the J. William Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Political Science at the University of Arkansas. He earned his BA from the University of Miami and his MA and PH degrees from the University of Kentucky. His articles have appeared in the Journal of Politics, American Politics Research, Social Science Quarterly PS, Political Psychology, Political Research Quarterly, Women in Politics, and American Politics Quarterly. Both Dr. Maxwell and Dr. Shields have each authored and co-authored several books, and together co-authored The Legacy of Second Wave Feminism in American Politics, which is forthcoming next month, and they are working on a new book entitled The Long Southern Strategy for the Oxford University Press. Dr. Maxwell has a 7-year-old daughter who keeps her on her toes, and Dr. Shields also has a daughter who, from what we know about her, probably keeps him on his toes too. So please help me welcome Dr. Angie Maxwell and Dr. Todd Shields.
This is so exciting to be here because I think I spoke here maybe 4 years ago and we were in the other room and we were a much smaller group. So that's the most uplifting thing that you might hear today. Unfortunately, as Denise Garner always tells me, my research and talks depress her. Which I understand. Motivate. My students say the same thing. But I'm a big believer in you cannot change what you won't acknowledge, and so we have to talk about the big elephant in the room, this election cycle, which was the role that sexism played in both the treatment of Hillary Clinton and Jill Stein and in the potential outcome. And the very best way that we can kind of set this up is to remind folks, and I know a lot of you know this, but there's a lot I feel like my generation and my students just don't know or have forgotten or have not been taught. But prior to Hillary Clinton getting the nomination in 2000, or getting a significant amount of delegates in 2008 and then getting the nomination in 2016, we have to go really back to 1972 to see a woman, Shirley Chisholm, get like 150 delegates at the convention, right? So all of that time, when you look at that and we realize that it has not been this linear progress that women have been making, it really hasn't. It seems like we have kind of a moment, and then we had kind of it quelled, and then we have another moment. And you have to kind of take that big picture and say, what happened, what's still going on, and how the nature of sexism, if it's changed, has played into the way we treat and deal with female candidates, okay? Now, Gallup has been asking people if they're ready for a female president or want to see a female president since the 1930s, right? They've been asking that, consistently. And the thing that's really strange about it is you'll get about, America agrees to Gallup that like 90% of us are ready for a female president, right? But it's misleading Because if you dig a little deeper and you find survey research and polls over the years that have asked not just, do you think you'll see a female president in your lifetime, but ask if you are excited about it, if you're enthusiastic about it, those numbers drop precipitously, right? Also, psychologists have done list experiments where they try to kind of figure out if people are saying what they mean or if it's starting to raise anger in them about the idea. And when they do those, you see that it shaves off about 1/3 of the population that believes that this is a good thing, and those numbers are even higher when you restrict it to Southern audiences. And then here's, to me, the most kind of interesting part, and the reason we really don't talk about it, and I think that we've misunderstood it, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room have not, many of you have lived it, but we tend to think that it's an issue between men and women, and it's really not. If you really go into sociologists that have looked at it, and even anthropologists who've done field work kind of talking to voters, you tend to hold kind of the sexist attitudes I'm going to talk about, whether you're a man or a woman, if you kind of have a negative view of feminism. If you don't, you tend to be obviously very non-sexist. But it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. It doesn't break on gender. It breaks on your attitude towards kind of feminism. And that's been true since the second wave movement in the 70s. So this isn't a man versus women problem. Women do this to each other, right? And there are a lot of men who are women's advocates, right? So we kind of got to dispel that myth. Now, the best way we thought to try to get some real data on this, and not just, I mean, obviously I'm sure almost everyone in this room has anecdotal feelings about this. I know I do. But to be a good social scientist, or a fake numbers guy, as Dan Fairder called me when I came here. We're gonna have to ask some questions that have been pretty consistent over time, right? So in 2012, when we ran some of our survey research, which Dean Shields is going to tell you about, we asked a battery of 5 questions called the Modern Sexism Scale. Now, we asked it in 2012 just because I have had kind of some feelings about something I was trying to say about Southern culture, right? And the numbers came back really high on modern sexism. And so, of course, in 2016, we decided to ask them again because we got a female candidate, 2 female candidates actually, that we can look at and see the impact that it's having, okay? So I'm gonna let Dean Shields tell you a little bit about our data, and then I'm gonna go into what modern sexism measures specifically, okay?
Sorry that we're gonna tag team this a little bit tonight, but if there's anything that's wrong, it's my fault, okay? That's first rule of Dean, I think, right? I wanna tell you a little bit about how we collect this data, because when we're looking at attitudes toward race or sexism, or anything that's a little bit controversial, one of the things that we found is that if you do a traditional telephone survey, people are really hesitant to tell you what they really think. And that was one of the reasons we believe that so many survey researchers got this past election wrong. Not only were they not asking the questions that we were asking, but they were doing it in the traditional manner. And people are becoming more sophisticated about what's socially acceptable and what's not. So we actually conducted this online. Now, if you conduct surveys online, you have a representation problem, right? Because not everybody has a connection. Well, a company that was started from a professor at Stanford called Knowledge Networks, they're very expensive, and we're fortunate enough to have the Blair Center Endowment to be able to pay for this research. But they actually put together, they worked with the Census Bureau and put together a representative sample of 1 million people that they refresh all the time. And if you don't have, if you're a very rural Southern person and you don't have internet connection, if they randomly select you, they will come and hook you up. And as long as you will do 1 or 2 surveys a week, they pay for your hookup. You will have internet connection at your house. They've overcome the representation problem. So that's important because what we found is that when we ask people things online, sitting in the privacy of their home, answering on question, they answer much more honestly. And the results that we get are much more reflective of what's happening when Obama was elected and when Trump was elected.
Okay, so what is modern sexism? What does it measure? Well, it does not look at is a woman capable, right? And I think that that's kind of why, but I think most people didn't really question Hillary Clinton's level of experience. You know, is she tough, right? So we kind of, I think pundits and people that were analyzing it tended to dismiss, like we've broken through that barrier and it's not an issue anymore, right? Nobody would question they might not like her, they might not trust her, but they're not going to question, like, does she have the experience to do the job? She's been Secretary of State, right? But sexism and that's a big accomplishment. That is a big step forward. But the problem is that the kind of life and choices that it takes to break that barrier, where people don't question your capability in general, creates an entirely different obstacle, which is that women who are ambitious are disliked, that they're untrustworthy, that they're only looking out for themselves, that they're dishonest, right? So modern sexism is a measure that kind of looks at resentment towards working women, towards feminists, towards that kind of ambition. It's 5 questions. It was developed in the 1990s by psychologists, and these are the 5 questions. Many women are actually seeking special favors, such as hiring policies that favor them over men under the guise of asking for equality. Most women interpret innocent remarks or acts as being sexist. Feminists are seeking for women to have more power than men. When women lose to men in a fair competition, they typically complain about being discriminated against. And discrimination against women is no longer a problem in the United States. Okay? So these 5 statements, then people had the option to not answer, right? To strongly agree, be neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree, right? You had all of those options, right? And so at its core, it's getting at this kind of idea that women who are pushing for equality or saying that there are still problems, are pointing to sexism, are making it up, untrustworthy, dishonest about their agendas, right? And feminism has been kind of demonized. Now we can talk in the questions about how we got to this place, because that's a whole other story. But we want to tell you kind of what we found, okay? So what are those levels in the United States by different racial groups and gender groups and in different regions and so on. So I hope you're done eating.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you the bad news, and since a lot of this is online, I'm not gonna belabor the data a lot. And if you want to ask questions, you can. Dr. Maxwell is going down to the first figure, and I don't know if you can see that. Oh, you can't see that. If I can see it, I know you can see it. Then, so if you look here, in the green bars on your right is really the one we're looking at the most. And that's the percentage of that group in the horizontal bar that scored on the sexist end of things. These are people that had above a 15 on this scale. People that did a neutral are in the yellow, and then people that were disagreeing with those or a non-sexist kind of response are in the brown color. So if you look, 36% of everyone in the United States is, according to this scale, a sexist. They do not necessarily see women as inferior, but they do see the fight for equality as really a guise for gaining power over men, and have a lot of resentment toward that. If you look at the breakdowns for white Americans, it's over a third. 20% of African Americans, I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. Latinos and Latinas, similar to whites. Democrats down to 21, independents 36, 53% of Republicans. And that's something that we're going to come back and say quite a bit, that this is a partisan issue. Okay, it does fall on that divide. And then one of our interests in the Blair Center is the South versus non-South. And we see that when we look at the region of the South and the non-South, there is a difference with more sexism in the South, but not substantially. Okay, let me go to the next one.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with the mouse.
Okay, that's okay. Well, she gets to the next one.
I'm so used to my touch screen, I keep reaching to scroll down.
So this is just, and I'm not going to belabor this, but this is among men only. And if you look, these numbers go up. And so all men, over 40% of all men are seeing this. Yes, I have a question.
We can't see it. So
You can't?
Tell us what it is.
Okay. So the first horizontal bar is basically saying that 42% of all the men that responded in our sample responded in a sexist manner. And only 17% of them had a neutral response. And it's arguable that, what are these people in the neutral category? They're not even taking an opinion, right? I mean, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt, but there is an argument there that this is something that you should have an opinion on, and what does that neutrality really represent? Well, let's assume it really does mean that they don't have an opinion on it. The people that are willing to say that we think that feminists are just out for power, that women will just complain with innocent remarks, and if they lose in a fair fight, they will scream discrimination and claim that they're fighting for equality, but they're not, okay? So 42% of all men, if you look at whites, it's 44%. African American men were the lowest, at 26%. Latinos, 42. Democrats are 27. And then I'm jumping to Republicans, 56. 56% of all Republican men agreed with these sexist comments. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Yes,
I've got a quick question. Did you look at age?
We did.
Okay. Okay, sorry. We'll get to
My
that.
boss says we'll get to that. The question was, did we look at age? And we'll get back to that. So looking at women, and Angie was saying that it's not a male-female problem. If you look at all women, you still have 31% of women who are falling into the sexist category. They're having some resentment to women who are really in the workplace and ambitious. So if you look at white women, it's 33%. African American women are again among the lowest, 16%. Latinas are 36%. Among Democrats, 17% of women Democrats are in the sexist category. 31% independents, and almost 48.9% of women in the Republican Party. Again, differences in the South and non-South, but not as much as we actually might have expected. So the next one, we're looking at regional differences, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a big argument when you're understanding or trying to study Southern politics. Do you look at the region of the South, which is the 11 states of the Confederacy, or do you look at people who identify as Southern, right? And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that somebody that moved here and lives in Miami, Florida is not really Southern in that respect. But someone who says, I'm Southern, right, then that has all these background that we're talking about and working on in our book, The Long Southern Strategy. And the regional differences that I pointed out earlier grow when we look at people that call themselves Southern. And that's true if we look at Southern whites, Southern white men, and look at Southern white women. And in fact, if you look down at the women that call themselves Southern white women, at the very bottom, you see 45% of them fall into the sexist category. So I'm happy to answer other questions about this, but I want to move to the next part. But the gist is the level of sexism, the level of resentment against women who are in the workplace and being ambitious is pretty prevalent across the country and across most groups, African Americans being the one exception to that.
Okay, so let me talk about what happened in the primaries, okay? Because we actually have those questions. And I want to also say very quickly that in 2008, when Obama ran, most political scientists and good pollsters knew that there would be some backlash, what's called the Bradley effect, right? Which is people who should vote for this candidate based on what they believe in, but just couldn't go and pull the trigger for an African American, right? And people fought over, would that be 5 points? Would that be 1 point? Like, how big is that in 2008, right? But we knew it was there. So pollsters would kind of work that into their models, like almost like a handicap. Like, okay, he's got to overperform by this much in order for us to really feel safe calling this. No one that we can find or know of put anything in their polls about this. And it's going to turn out to have as much as big of an impact, if not larger, than race, right? So when we wonder, when we do all the self-reflection the week after the election, what did we get wrong, what did we get wrong, what did we get
Yeah, and for those of you who have some statistical or mathematical background, what I'd like to move, Angie, if you don't mind, go to the logit models. What we did next was showing percentages is one thing to say, look at this is the number of people, percentage of people that didn't voted for Bernie but didn't vote for Hillary in the end, and what is their modern sexism score. What we did next is we put logistic regression models together, which basically we can say, what is the effect of modern sexism even when we control for alternative explanations? So we know party ID influences people. We know that ideology influences people. We know that issue positions, race, education, income, they all influence how we see the world and how we vote. If we control for all those, there's no way you're going to see that. But if we control for all those other explanations, your ideology, your party ID, your age, your gender, your race, your region, your education level, we still find the biggest effect is according to modern sexism scale. More than your party ID, more than your ideology. Let me tell you what that means in non-statistical terms. It means that if somebody walked in that door and we wanted to ask them one thing to predict what they or who they voted for in the 2016 election, we would not ask them their party ID. We would not ask them ideology. We would ask them these questions about modern sexism, and we'd be right more often than these other questions. And that is really important because it's not something that we hear talked about at all. But when we predict what Bernie supporters jumped and went to Trump, it's modern sexism that predicts that. We say who voted for Trump in the general election, it's modern sexism that predicts that. And we've estimated this model on every different group, and it's the same on all the prosecutors.
So I'm going to kind of wrap up, and I want to speak to what Denise asked about age. You know, age is run in the model. It was only significant among Democrats. It was slightly significant. Older Democrats, particularly older Democratic women, were more likely to vote for a female candidate than anyone else, statistically significant. Which I was going to say, you can probably guess by looking at the turnout of this room. But it's also because I believe it's that generation of women who remember what has been gained, what has been fought for, right? And younger generations that too often have benefited and not realized, right, that struggle, right? And part of what has happened that has caused that gap, that partisan gap, right? And that's caused us all of that memory to fade about what the struggle was. I mean, when I tell my students, like, women couldn't get a credit card in their own name, and they couldn't, you know, they couldn't get birth control, and they couldn't get a no-fault divorce, and they couldn't get all this, and UVA didn't admit women until 1978. They cannot, even though I'm sure 1978 sounds like a very long time ago to them, our memory of that is not what it should be because of the sacrifices that were made, you know, for all of the rest of us. I'm sure many of you were a part of that. But one of the reasons that's happened is because of the strong backlash, the anti-feminist backlash that happened in the wake of it. You know, both parties supported the Equal Rights Amendment for almost 40 years, having it on their platform. Both parties. Republicans actually put it first. Right? In 1980, the Republican Party, in an effort to win Southern voters who had kind of gone back towards Jimmy Carter, the Democrat, in '76, just like there had been some divergence over the enforcement of civil rights, in 1980 they dropped the ERA from their platform, right? And there was a new push for family values, traditional gender roles, you know, masculinity redefined, and that came with a very aggressive characterization of what feminism is and was, right? We're coming up on the 40-year anniversary of the National Women's Conference, the only national kind of women's convention that was ever held in Houston, right? Which was kind of the big moment or split. Anybody here went? Anybody here was there? I want to talk to you. If you were there? And a lot of the feminists showed up really believing that it was a nonpartisan issue. Every first lady was there, Republican and Democrat, right? Because it was kind of an understanding that there may be partisan disagreements on what the policies should be for women's advancement, or what the policies should be in terms of even reproductive rights. Like there are disagreements there, but that everyone kind of believed in women's equality. And the anti-feminist movement under the now late Phyllis Schlafly won over a lot of Southern white women. And they showed up at the convention and they pushed anti-feminism as a coherent ideology that was worthy of competition to the ideology of feminism. They set up a false equivalency, right? That belief system was equal to feminism. And feminism was choice. So it already had all the options already embedded in it, right? So that false equivalency, right, created kind of this anti-feminist ideology. It's pushed under family values, and it's actually a lot of anti-feminist Southern church women who show up and push it, right? And then Republican male establishment sees how effective it is and adopts it in the elections that come after, and take family values to mean a whole, other thing in terms of women's rights, gay rights, reproductive rights, all of those things, right? And so that false equivalency, that choice to set it up that way, because the opposite of feminism is sexism, not anti-feminism. Real feminism includes everybody, right? You can do whatever role you want, right? That setting it up like that is what's caused a 30-point gap between the parties on it. And we had the first female nominee of one of those parties. No one put it in their models predicting who would win, because she was capable, so therefore we don't need to talk about it, right? And it's not easy to talk about, right? But it is a conversation we're going to have and figure out how to deal with, or we are going to suffer the consequences of women getting the leadership positions that we need them to have, right? So we felt very compelled. This report got longer and longer and longer as the summer went on, but we are so blessed to have the resources we have because of the life and example that Diane Blair led, that now we get to take those resources and do work I think she lived and would be proud of, and gather this data, real data, concrete numbers that can show where we need to go, right? And we've got to recognize that attitude towards working women is shared by a lot of women, and it has become a partisan divide, right? A partisan divide. So, yeah, I think that we are going to stop there, and I know there's probably questions, and we both want to make sure we get to those questions. So thank you for listening to us. Great question. It's a great question. Well, how did Blanche Lincoln win, right? First of all, important to note, women have had more success in House districts because they're smaller and well-known, right? And there have been only a handful that have had success, right, in statewide elections, particularly in the South. So Blanche is like a wonderful case in point. How do I say this? She was a conservative Democrat, I think she'd call herself that, particularly back in those days. Women who don't run on what would be called feminist issues, or aren't identified that way, unfortunately can be successful. In most other countries, the first female president is a conservative. So it's like it's too much to have a woman who also fights for women's rights, right? That's too much. I mean, it's a big generalization, right? But it's pretty accurate. And whether they believe that or not, they don't promote it, right? They definitely don't stump on that. They definitely play kind of a traditional appeal to the culture, which I think her farm background and all of those things, that does not mean that's what she believes. It doesn't mean she wouldn't go and fight for women's rights. But it means she was somehow able to go, not advertise that, not get labeled that way, right? Not get identified that way, not come off that way. She definitely did not give a vibe of Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or something like that, who've been the two that have been the quickest to be really publicly kind of chastised, you know. So that, you know, there was this really fascinating article that compared Elizabeth Dole and Hillary Clinton back in, you know, 1996, when they were both stumping for their spouses who were running, and people said, Elizabeth Dole, they liked her so much. They really liked her personality. And this research was saying, well, it's their 10-year age gap. You know, Hillary Clinton came up in second wave feminism, Elizabeth Dole came up before that, right? But I really think it's that Elizabeth Dole also plays that kind of Southern female traditional values kind of person. Now, she's one of the most successful, well-educated, accomplished women, right? But she definitely does not play that in a dynamic with her spouse, right? She definitely plays down that. So here's the interesting thing. Elizabeth Dole, very well liked. Hillary Clinton, not. But when Elizabeth Dole tried to run for president in 2000, believing all the people encouraging her that she would be a phenomenal candidate, no one gave her money. The Republicans did not back her. Hillary Clinton disliked, the people give her money, they take her seriously as a candidate. And we have to somehow find the middle where a woman can be both taken seriously and be liked, right? Because you need both things. To be successful at the highest level, you have to be both likable and taken seriously, right? Those are like the two things. They gotta want to have a beer with you, and they gotta think that you're serious, right? Well, maybe this throws everything out. I don't know. Yeah?
Do we have numbers for each state?
No.
Okay, this is South and not South.
Well, this is a big national poll. So in order to get, and it's a big national poll. It's got a plus or minus of 2 points. It's really, and it's got a lot more than just this in it. This is looking at like 5 questions it's got in it, right? But if you're going to get a big national poll, you have to sacrifice getting enough in an individual state. States that are heavily populated, like in New York, we probably have enough, but it's probably very Manhattan-centric. So you make a choice. You either do an in-depth state poll, where you can really talk about Arkansas, right? Or you do a big national poll with trends. And for us, all of the books that have been written about Southern politics and why the South behaves a certain way and when they started going with the Republican Party, they're all based on the A&ES, which is a survey that had been done through University of Michigan since, I think, 48. We were just looking at it the other day, looking at what everyone said about when Southerners started to go to Goldwater in '64, right? And how people downplayed how many Southerners went because they want to kind of quell that racial story, right? You look at the sample that all that's been based on, and there's 100 Southerners. That's it. But it's all people had. and 30 of them live in Texas in that sample, and LBJ was running for re-election, right? So much of what we know and the story we've told ourselves is really inaccurate, you know, and so we made a decision when we started this poll, and this is our third one, that we were going to get that data. So it has an oversample of the South and an oversample of African Americans and Latinos in the South. Half the Latinos take it in Spanish. We have some that are non-citizens. Like, it gets as in-depth as we can do, but we sacrifice state specificity for that purpose. Yeah, right.
Okay, well, this is wonderful data to have, but how do we get to apply it to, you still have the basic notion of looking at leadership women, and in order, I mean, it's the same with civil rights. If there's going to be equality, it means I'm losing something.
It's seen as a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I guess what I'm wanting to know is, how do we apply all of this data to upcoming elections, to upcoming, getting people in leadership roles? I mean, you're still applying that same kind of notion of, I'm up here and they're trying to rise to equality, and I don't want to give up being up here.
Right, because there's this false perception. It's been set up that way to believe that, right? And you raise a really good point, because sometimes what we forget is that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was not just about race, that, you know, gender gets thrown in an effort to kill the bill and then somehow makes it through, right? Oops. And so when there were the first affirmative action policies trying to kind of, you know, jumpstart recovery, particularly in places in the South where there was just such resistance, it was women who went into the workplace. It was women who had the educational levels and the training, but had not had the opportunity. We had such a gap, and it had so excluded African Americans from being able, in high numbers, to have those degrees needed, right? That it was women that rushed in. It was women that really changed that work-family dynamic, right? Which, as you all know, I'm sure, changes life, you know, when both people work, or someone decides to stay home and then come back to work, or whatever, right? And so it's that resentment that was kind of growing was there, and it seemed somehow as if by some that women in the workplace, right, that it's somehow threatening to men, but it's because everything's seen as an us versus them, right? And it's set up that way on purpose, because it's easy to politicize and get you to vote that way, right? So the way I think, I mean, and Denise and I've had some conversations about this. If you're a moderate Republican or an independent and you chose this candidate this time, I don't know if you're swinging back from that. But I know there's a huge chunk of Arkansans who did not vote because they do not feel, they don't have good information, they do not feel like anyone represents them, right? I believe really strongly the Democratic Party's got to let, you know, got to understand that, got to let people be social conservatives a little bit, as much as we don't like it. Got to let religious people of faith have a place in the party. And we cannot control if the Republican Party chooses to demonize the Democratic Party, but we can choose in the Democratic Party whether we demonize back or whether we include. And this all happened because Republicans decided in the 60s that their electoral map was not going to work unless they pulled Southern voters. And they chased those Southern voters on a host of different issues, right? And we can chase disaffected Trump voters, or we can chase the people who have not participated. Arkansas is 44th out of 50 states in women participating in elections, right? We have to re-educate and re-encourage women that it is that's their responsibility, that it is part of, even if they choose a very traditional gender role in their life, that it is still their responsibility to participate in public life, that they belong in public life. Whether that, I mean, they run for office, they belong, they make decisions for their family, they belong and have a say-so, right? We have a lot of our culture that doesn't say that, and a lot of religious institutions, right, that downplay that as well. The exact same time that the Republicans dropped the ERA from their platform is the same time the Southern Baptist Convention brings back, they're gone, brings it back and doubles down on women being submissive to their husbands. They recodify it, they put it back into their bylaws, right? And they chase women out of seminary that were starting to be in seminary, right? So there was this backlash movement that somehow, and gender's harder to talk about because people love their spouse or they want a lot for their daughter and they don't it's a lot harder to talk about in some ways because it's very personal. Whereas there are a lot of people who are very removed from racial issues, right? This is in your own house and your family and it's hard. But that's also why we kind of missed how big this backlash has been and how long it's been growing and how much of it kind of bubbled over the surface in this election, which is painful, but it's also good to know, right? We have to allow women, Obama said it honestly in one of his last speeches. I don't know how many people were paying attention of the election. It's the last thing I'll say, but he said if there is a reason, he was speaking to a crowd, I think in Ohio, and he said if there's a reason you can't put your finger on why you don't want to vote for this woman, if you can't put your finger on it, you might want to think about why is there so much distrust? Why is there so much animosity? I mean, there's a reason why the issues that were picked to go after her were the issues they were and why they worked, right? Because underneath all of that, there isn't anything. And I think people in Arkansas know that more than anybody, how many things there have been, right? But there is a predisposition to that distrust and a predisposition to thinking a woman who's gone that far and been that ambitious has an agenda, right? That can't be public service. That can't be it, right? And so then any little bit of evidence or little comment or little thing really hits a nerve and has the ability to really affect people's attitudes pretty dramatically, right? So I think our own soul searching has to be watching that always. Women too. Why am I having this feeling? Why am I wondering what this person's up to? What's their motivation? What's driving them here? Because if you're having this feeling, maybe it is somebody who's got an agenda, but maybe it's just our culture that's embedded those social constructions into all of us. None of us can escape it, right? It's not even necessarily our fault, right? But why does that distrust there? And how is it being manipulated politically, right? That's really important. The three major news networks spent 32 minutes total on Hillary Clinton's policies during the campaign. 32 minutes. CBS, ABC, NBC. 32 minutes actually talking about substantive, what she stood for, right? So it wasn't, she can't do it. It was, we don't like her because she can.
Don't you think that the fact that her husband was Bill Clinton had any impact on the voting?
That's a great question, actually, and I wish she asked, did Bill Clinton being her husband have any impact on the election? It's a question I wish we would have asked, because it's a good question. In the sense that I think her long history to stay in that relationship and how that was handled all of those years ago made a lot of feminists doubt her, right? She lost some support there. The idea of him as first man is not a concept that got a lot of coverage and play, right? But is a weirdness or a discomfort that a lot of Americans kind of feel, right? But it's more that we know from tracking her approval ratings, because she's one of the public figures we have 40 years of approval ratings on, that people don't dip when she, just in general, they dip when she runs for office or goes after something powerful. So when she takes on health care, they dip. When she decides to run for Senate, they dip. When she decides to run for president, they dip, right? Once she's in the office and doing the job, they go back up. They like what it is she can do. They do not like, there's enough people that don't like a woman asking for power in a way that's unapologetic, in a way that is like most other male candidates kind of would, you know, who are tough and don't back down. They don't like that. And who she had to be to stay in political, and I don't know her, and I'm sure many of you do, but any woman that was the first to get to that place, the road she had to take to survive and play the game, whether it's, I mean, she couldn't even keep her name. She couldn't even run for office under the name she wanted to be called, because we won't allow it, right? Who she's had to go turn herself inside out and flip-flop to stay in the game has made people distrust her and made people, you know, think she has a tight group and doesn't branch out and isn't likable and all those things, right? And Bill Clinton, for all of the good policy-wise, put her in some tough situations where that looked even, that was even harder. But I think that spotlight, no matter who the female was, the first one to go I mean, you got, Obama had to play it perfect. Perfect. Nothing. No scam, nothing. And they made up $1 million, nothing. You know, there are very few human beings whose life is that, you know. That is just, like I said, depressing, right? That was a great question. Anyway.
Well, maybe depressing, but in a motivating way. It makes us, yes, Adela?
We don't have the website.
Oh,
Yes.
Can you email it to us?
Yes.
it's on the main, you type in Blair Center, University of Oregon, it comes up. It's on the main page. The whole report, a link, a fast facts, an appendix.